Hello, my name is Blair. Welcome to our sensory awareness series. Today is day one, and so we're going to be keeping things pretty basic with a discussion of what SPD is and what it looks like for different people. So let's get started. When I say sensory processing, what I'm talking about are the conversations that have to happen between the brain and the rest of your nervous system in order to know what's going on, both inside of your body and outside of your body, as well as what to do about it. When sensory information can be perceived, understood, and responded to with relative ease, this is called sensory integration. For most people, their sensory processing software just kind of runs in the background, no problem. But when your sensory processing is dysfunctional, these conversations don't tend to happen very efficiently. It can be like too many tabs are open in your brain and you have no way to close any of them, and you're trying to go through each one and figure out if it's actually important, and then suddenly you're behind on it and your friend keeps talking and the background noise keeps going and suddenly everything is too loud and too bright and It's a pretty frustrating experience. So what does SPD look like? It has three subtypes. The first type is called sensory modulation disorder, and it has three characteristics. There's overresponsivity, which is that hypersensitivity that a lot of people think about when they think about having a sensory issue. There's underresponsivity, which can make people seem really kind of zoned out or disinterested, but it's because their brain is telling them, there's not a lot going on. And then the last one is sensory craving, which the best analogy I can really make for this one is it's like if you're really hungry, like absolutely starving, and then you eat a whole table of food and you still feel the exact same amount of hunger. This is what it's like for the brain. It's just hungering for this sensory input all the time, but no matter how much it gets, it's never satisfied. And this typically leads to a lot of sensory seeking behaviors like running around, crashing into things, constant motion, stuff like that. So because we have so many senses, more about that later, SMD can look wildly different depending on the person. For example, I personally am really undersensitive to taste and smell, and I'm really oversensitive to tactile sensations and sounds. So somebody else could be the complete opposite of me and still have just as much SPD. The second type is called sensory-based motor disorder, and this affects balance and coordination. People with this form of SPD have very poor motor planning, which basically means their brain has trouble telling the muscles what to do and in the correct order. This actually has a name, and it's called dyspraxia. It can make learning tasks involving certain patterns of muscle movement, like handwriting or riding a bike, difficult or even impossible depending on the severity. They may tend to be sedentary since moving around just generates a lot of sensory processing demands that are difficult to keep up with. The third and final subtype is called sensory discrimination disorder, and this basically involves difficulty interpreting the subtle qualities of certain types of sensory stimuli. And this isn't limited to one or two senses, it could be any combination of them. For example, someone with visual SDD might have a lot of trouble reading, because reading obviously involves a lot of interpretation of visual stimuli in the form of words printed on a page. Someone with auditory SDD, which is sometimes called auditory discrimination disorder, might constantly be asking for repetition of things that are said, but it's not because they have a hearing loss or because you aren't talking loud enough, it's because their brain isn't really good at figuring out what is being said. So now we know all the different flavors of SPD, but how many people actually have it? I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't know. At this moment, SPD is still a little bit of a controversial diagnosis, and I don't have time to unpack that whole issue in this video, but trust me, I will get to it a few days down the road. The STAR Institute, which is an organization dedicated to promoting SPD awareness, among other things, cites a couple of studies on their website, one of which found a rate of 1 in 20, and another found a rate of 1 in 6. Now, this can seem really striking, but understand that these studies both had limited sample sizes and they were also only done on children. So we don't really know how many adults struggle with SPD on a day-to-day basis, and those numbers can't even really be extrapolated to all children, so we definitely need more research. One very important thing to know about SPD is that the brain may know intellectually that it is receiving the wrong sensory information. but it still will not be able to control the atypical sensory response. The brain's perception is its reality, and it is impossible to reason, scold, or punish it into interpreting sensory information correctly. So, what can you do to help the sensory disordered brain? Dr. Anna Jean Ayres, who first described SPD back in the 60s, developed a technique called sensory integration therapy, which is basically it's a form of occupational therapy where everything in the room is designed to promote the development of some kind of sensory integration skill. Sensory integration therapy and other forms of occupational therapy are still used very, very commonly for children and sometimes for adults, but unfortunately there's really not a lot of resources for adults with SPD. Which is really sad because, as far as we know, SPD is a lifelong condition. It has no cure, and although certain anti-anxiety medicines might ease the stress of living with SPD, there's no medication for sensory regulation. Usually the best way to cope with SPD is just by structuring your lifestyle to be as sensory friendly as possible, but that can be really difficult in this sensory unfriendly world. However, I am really hopeful that this will change as awareness continues to grow. That's the reason why I'm making this video series, is so people have this resource to find when they meet someone with SPD or they hear about SPD and they want to know more. So this concludes day 1 of our sensory awareness series. I hope you learned something new. Make sure to do something sensational today, and I will hopefully see you tomorrow. Bye!